Okay, so before we go any further, I want to take a minute to talk about something that's going to be really important in pretty much every video from now on, which is how to name new vectors or data frames or matrices, basically how to name your new objects that you're creating. So there are good ways and bad ways of naming things, and I'm going to go over a couple examples of good names and a couple examples of really bad names. So here I've got some good names listed. The first one, called clean volcano data, whatever that means. This is a good way of naming things if you've got to have multiple words in the name, and you can do this just by capitalizing the first letter of each word. And this is good because we don't want the names separated by periods or dashes or underscores. Stylistically, this is what our users prefer. The second example there, friend names, is also good. It's just one word, they don't need to capitalize the second name. So those are both good names for new data frames or new vectors. Now some examples of some bad names. In the first example, I've tried to save a new vector and named it true in all caps. This is bad because true, while it is a word, it also means something in R. You can see it's turned purple there. And this is bad because we can't save a vector into a function name or the name of something that R uses. So true is technically a value in itself in R, so we cannot save anything named true. The second example is similar to that in that we don't want to save a vector called mean because mean is already a function in R. Now, R will sometimes actually allow you to save vectors into words that have meaning, which is really bad, which is why, though some may allow it, we really want to avoid doing that. You want to come up with a name that's unique, that isn't going to be confused with a function. So the perfect name is going to be unique, descriptive, and not already a function in R. So this last example is a bad name because blurg doesn't mean anything. When you go to call up that data later, it might be a while down the road and you might have forgotten what's saved in there. We want to have a name like in our good names where it says clean volcano data. That's pretty descriptive. That tells me what the data is and like what I've done to it. So clearly that's data that I've already cleaned up and I don't need to go into the data and look at it in order to know what's saved into that. So blurg, not a great name. You want your names to be descriptive of what the data actually is. As I mentioned before, when we're making a name, we don't really want words in there that are separated by periods or dashes or underscores. So while it is okay to name a vector the first one, it's much preferable to name it the second one or the third one without anything in between the words, but capitalizing the first word so that we can tell the words apart a little easier. Straying away from naming a little bit and just talking about the basic kind of rules of writing in R, we always want to put spaces in between our operators. So in this case, we've got binary operators, which just means the symbols for addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So the first one, it will work, but we always want to put spaces around everything. So the second one is what you should be writing instead of the first. And you might look at this and say, well, that's silly, like I don't need to put spaces there. But trust me, later on when we've got much more complex code, and it's not always going to look like this is just basic math. You'll often have some math like this, but interspersed with more complex code. And putting those spaces before and after the operators will make your code much easier to read and much more understandable to anyone else trying to read your code. And lastly, you always want to put a space after you write a comma. So both of those first two examples are correct. This is subsetting a matrix where we're naming a row and a column. Those first two examples are correct, and you'll see my matrix code later on. The first two are the ways that you should write it, and the second two are going to work for you, but they're not preferable. I'm often guilty of incorrectly spacing in this situation, so don't crucify me if I do it later on in the videos, but you should always try to put a space after your commas. Again, it will make your code much more readable and understandable. And as a last note, if you're not sure about something, if you're not sure if you're naming something correctly, or you think your spacing is off, or things like that, you can check out Google's R style guide. And you can find this just by Googling, literally, Google's R style guide. It'll pop up. And it's basically a guide that all of the R users at Google have collaborated on, have put together, and agreed that these are kind of some things that we're all going to agree on to do so that we can read each other's code more easily, so that we can all understand each other's code. So in there, you're going to find all of what I said in this video and a whole lot more. But what I've said here are the basics of what you need to know to properly name things and to make sure you can understand your own code just a little bit better.